Okay, in just a few minutes from now, I'm going to reveal the real hidden cause of your uncontrolled blood sugar diabetes and weight gain, and show you the scientific evidence that proves beyond all doubt that your diabetes can be reversed simply by adding these 2 simple dressings to your current diet. But first, it's time I introduce myself properly. Hello, my name is Eric Whitfield. I'm an iron worker. My wife Kathy and I live in Owego, New York, and I'm 53 years old. We have a son and daughter and 3 awesome grandkids and another one on the way. I've been a hardworking guy all my life, scaling skyscrapers and even done some ship fitting in my day. Believe it or not, I was even part of the cleanup crew sent to the ground zero after 9/11. With the exception of hearing Kathy was minutes away from a potentially fatal coma at that time, I spent at the remains of the World Trade Center was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. Words are just so inadequate to try and share with you what I saw and felt during those long, awful days. You really understand what it means to come under attack. And do you know something? That's happening to our bodies each and every day. We're all under vicious attack from an enemy that cares nothing for us, that's forcing diabetes upon us, each and every person on Earth, no matter their age, race, or situation. Fortunately for you, a bizarre chain of events handed me the weapon I needed to defeat this invisible diabetes causing toxin for good and save my wife's life. And it will do the same for you too. So how did I do it? Well, right now I have a very personal and embarrassing story to tell you, which begins almost 5 years ago. Up until then, frankly, my ignorance about diabetes could have filled Yankee Stadium. We were your average, happily married 40-somethings, enjoying life, and like the majority of people, taking our health for granted pretty much every day. I'm just a metal junkie. What did I know about diabetes? I was hardly ever sick a day in my life. Kathy began to complain more often about low energy and dizziness, until one cold January morning when we received the news that would change our lives forever. My wife was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Kathy was shocked. We all were. I mean, she was barely over 40 years old at the time. She'd been an all-star track athlete in her teens, an athlete her whole life. It was one of the things that made me fall in love with her. Straight away, the doctor put her on the medication metformin to regulate her blood glucose levels, and although we didn't realize it at the time, this moment would mark the beginning of a 5-year nightmare. It didn't take long for the side effects to kick in. Weakness, muscle pains, abdominal pains, heartburn, bloating, you name it, she had it. But still, we trusted the doctors and continued to let the medication help her. As the years rolled by, Kathy's energy levels, vitality, mood, and general health and well-being went rapidly downhill. And although her medication was supposed to help, she piled on more and more weight as she found herself unable to fight the intense cravings for sugary and starchy foods that overpowered her every day. She went from the energetic motivator to sluggish and overweight. And the more weight she put on, the more depressed she became, and the further away she drifted from the woman I'd fallen in love with. And if that was bad, things were about to get a whole lot worse. Just over a year ago, Kathy was diagnosed with high blood pressure and high cholesterol too, and she began to suffer from sharp, stabbing pains in her left leg and foot. She was told that she had nerve damage and was prescribed more meds to deal with that, which created a whole bunch of side effects that left her feeling sick and even more depressed. Before long, she found herself in so much pain because of the nerve damage that she could barely walk or even stand for longer than a few minutes. And because she wasn't able to get out of the house and do any kind of exercise, the weight just piled on, which put added pressure on her heart and other organs. She was stuck on the medication merry-go-round with no escape. Within the space of just 4 years, Kathy's weight had ballooned from a relatively healthy 160 pounds to a massive 216, and her blood sugar levels were becoming dangerously high. Kathy told me she feared the worst. We tried everything to help her get back her independence and health. Exercise, restrictive, boring, tasteless diets, plant-based diets. I even tried to get her to do the high-intensity exercise, but it was just too painful for her. We even tried the impossible 600-calorie-a-day diet that left her feeling weak and tired. In fact, after every single miracle diet, she ended up weighing more than when she started. Weight loss surgery was out of the question as her weight wasn't high enough, and even then it didn't feel right when her weight gain wasn't what caused the diabetes. The diabetes has caused her weight gain. On top of it all, our sex life had completely gone. We found ourselves slipping into a long, boring routine of going to work, watching TV, and going to bed while feeling constantly tired, depressed, unhappy, and dissatisfied. "Don't touch me, I'm fat and disgusting, and I'm always going to be fat and disgusting. I don't want you to touch me," she yelled. When I reached out to hold her, to kiss her, to show her how much I loved her no matter what she looked like, seeing her laying there in pain, grabbing her belly fat, she hated so much. I felt powerless and weak in every way I could never thought I could. She was my wife. I promised to take care of her, but I couldn't. It was the day after that when she collapsed at home while walking to the kitchen. I heard a loud bang and found her on the floor, her head heavily bleeding from the impact of the fall. Her breathing was erratic and shallow. I called an ambulance, who rushed her to the hospital. In the ambulance, she came to, but was barely conscious and confused. Once we reached the hospital, the doctor explained that she had suffered from severe ketoacidosis, that her blood sugar levels were too high, and she was minutes away from coma or death. She was showing all the warning signs such as frequent urination, thirst, fatigue, and shortness of breath, but I just didn't know about them at the time. Her blood sugar was over 480, a potentially fatal level. As I sat there beside her hospital bed, holding her hand in mine, I made a promise to myself. If Kathy survived, I was going to do everything in my power to defeat her diabetes for good, whatever it took. There was no way I was going to let my kids grow up without their mom, or grandkids without their grandma, and I knew I wouldn't be able to cope without her by my side. I was going to fix her, and I was going to do it without drugs. After all, the reason for most of her health problems over those 5 years had been because of the drugs she'd been taking. Because that's when her health really began to worsen. I knew that if I didn't act soon, the same thing could happen again, and I wasn't going to run that risk. Thankfully, Kathy survived her severe ketoacidosis, and the blood sugar lowering medications they gave took hold just as she was slipping away. She was feeling very sick and tired, but was conscious and alive. She'd been lucky. She stayed in the hospital that night, so beside her, I powered up my laptop when she'd gone to sleep and began my quest. First, I started with diabetes. It's well known that diabetes is caused by something called insulin resistance. This is when the cells in your muscles and organs start resisting or ignoring the signal that insulin is trying to give them, which is to take the blood sugar, also known as glucose, from the bloodstream and deposit it in the cells. It is this glucose that cells use as energy from the food we eat. Over time, as insulin resistance develops, your body fights back more by producing more insulin. The beta cells in your pancreas that are working so hard to make insulin get worn out and can no longer keep up with the demand for more and more insulin. Then, after insulin resistance silently begins, your blood sugar will rise and you will develop pre-diabetes or even type 2 diabetes. You may also develop non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, a growing problem associated with insulin resistance that boosts your risk for liver damage and heart disease. Take a look at this image. I'm sure this cycle sounds very familiar. You eat your food. That's at the top there. Your pancreas makes insulin to take the glucose out of your bloodstream so the cells can use it as fuel for energy. However, your cells resist the insulin, and in turn, you store these sugars as fat, causing tiredness and hunger. And hunger means more food, and the cycle starts all over again. This is the exact cycle that Kathy had been in for years, and the exact cycle you and any diabetic are in right now. And what causes insulin resistance? Well, I couldn't find a single precise and definite answer on why it happens in the first place, and why this has started only in the past 60 years. See this graph? Diabetes barely existed in the 1940s. Dr. Grayson himself stated that the medical industry isn't exactly sure where insulin resistance comes from, only why it is bad for us, and that it is increasing at a rapid rate. In fact, a recent report published by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention predicts that nearly 1/3 of all American adults will be diabetic by 2050 if things don't change. You may be saying it's because we're getting fatter, right? But we've had overweight men and women for centuries, all the way back to the Mayans. And there's always been a surplus of food, at times for every civilization. Remember that cycle of insulin resistance? The belly fat comes after insulin resistance, not before. And for Kathy, her dramatic weight gain started only after she started showing diabetic symptoms. So, if weight gain was simply a symptom of insulin resistance, what was the cause? How did you or Kathy get insulin resistance before all the symptoms began? For weeks, I scoured the internet, visited libraries, and read through hundreds of dusty old medical journals. I visited universities, spoke to doctors, endocrinologists, alternative therapists, and even Chinese herb doctors for help. But I found nothing new. Just the same old tired advice of exercise more, eat less sugar and fewer carbs, and take your meds like a good little diabetic. Advice that you or any other diabetic listening to my story today has heard a million times before. I felt like I'd hit a brick wall, and after weeks of research, I was nowhere. I'd left online posts on forums and message boards requesting any information that could help Kathy. I got a reply from a man we will call Kevin, who has chosen to remain anonymous to protect his identity. He had a real dislike for the diabetes industry and has been working